So hello again to my archetypal sister. She's back.
I mean, your archetypal sister? Are you kidding? Okay. Okay. It could be worse, you know.
That's true. That's true. You don't like being called archetypal. I think it's pretty good. So
yeah, okay.
we're going to talk about astrology in its more, let's say, faded ancient sense, and then the emergence of psychological astrology, which is more of a 20th century phenomenon, the pluses and the minuses of that, all the different ramifications, and especially as it relates to Carl Jung, which is your one of the main areas of your expertise, and how he saw it and the kinds of insights that he brought into the world and so forth. So I'll let you take the discussion.
Well, I mean, let's just follow on what we were talking about prior to this, about the many astrologies that exist, right? The many ways of looking at it. Now, interestingly, even though I am very much enamored of the psychological approach, and I know you like this too, not the psychological, but what I'm about to mention, it all starts with looking at the stars. It all starts with astronomy. And I don't know about you. I know in the past you've been very much enamored with this. I've gone back now to that because my real main interest is mythology. And really, you do not understand mythology until you understand the movement of those planets, how bright they are on the sky, when they're rising, when they're setting. And I think people forget that. And so it's very easy to belittle something like astrology until you realize it was actually the way that people kept time, the way they planted, the way they understood their universe, and the way their gods were fashioned. These gods all came from looking at planetary, and a part of the problem, I believe, is that we're so arrogant that we believe the ancients couldn't have known as much as they did. And yet I'll talk as a final thing, we'll build up to it, the whole notion of precession, the ages of, and how that leads to gods. And they knew that, they think before, there's some understanding the Babylonians already knew that, but for sure Hipparchus had calculated this by the 2nd century BCE. So where people understood, and you know why? Because in the periods before we had clocks and we had ways of measuring time and space more accurately, the only way you could measure time and space was through the planets. And they were so important to survival, right? So we built all of these great mythologies, and then we got very arrogant. By the 16th century, the Enlightenment comes around and we say, well, we don't really need the mythology. Let's kick the mythology out. And I think this is where, jumping right to psychology, where the early 20th century becomes really important. Now, of course, you know, Dane, Rudyard, all the astrology goes underground, basically around the 18th century, disappears, revived again by the Theosophists, late 19th century, and then really takes off in the 20th century when people start looking at things more from a psychological level. And of course, that aligns with the work specifically with Carl Jung and part of that Freud, although Freud would have no time for astrology because it would be the occult and he hated the occult. There's a lot of repression. There's a lot of repression. I think it's funny. There's so much repression in Freud, even though he kept accusing everybody of, repression himself. Yeah, but I guess we see it.
And that how it always is, right? It's like whatever you're connected to, you're kind of blind to your own shadow. Yeah, makes sense.
Absolutely. And that you see it very well. So what interests us, we talked about this before. So the reason, your archetypal sister is going to tell you that the interesting planets are all the trans-Saturnian. So up to the 1781, we just have Saturn. Everybody just knows the planets up to Saturn. Yeah. Saturn's the scary guy because Saturn is the skin. Saturn is the barrier between you and death and to the great unknown, right? So suddenly, and by the way, my new novel, I'm dealing totally with this period of time where, because I kept trying to imagine, how would it be that you suddenly sight a new planet? I mean, that's amazing. Think about that, right? That's just true. How it's like sighting the new world. You're suddenly discovering that the world is not what you thought it was. And I'm fascinated by changes in the psyche like that. The interesting thing about the outer planets, and I'm going to include Uranus, of course, and then Neptune, and then Pluto, and then now Eurus, is that they are pointing to forces that we have no control whatsoever over. And that's number one, I would think, that if they touch one of your personal planets, and you know this, and I know this, you are going to be overwhelmed in a way that it's not so the case if it's two personal planets. In other words, any planet before Saturn, right? Anybody who has Venus-Pluto square, Venus-Uranus opposition, a Sun-Pluto conjunction knows that they carry that archetypal energy with them. Yeah. And once you discover it, I think this is really funny. Once you see something, you cannot unsee it. That's a fundamental rule of everything. It's fundamental rule of psychology. People go into analysis, and once they discover that I have a Venus-Pluto problem, which, by the way, if you have it, you don't know it. You just you go right around projecting it on everybody, right?
You could say Pluto anything, by the way.
Oh, absolutely. I'm
yeah,
using Venus because I'm supposing that a lot of your listeners, viewers are very much focused on relationship. I think relationship is fundamental to why a lot of people actually learn about astrology. And Venus is also money. So it brings in a whole, can be, so, and self-worth. So it brings in so many issues that people struggle with. So this is why I picked Venus. But Sun, the moon, I mean, moon, nourishment, how you do it. The point is archetypal. Let's see, what is an archetype? An archetype is some energy, it's an inappropriate word, but some field out there that is constant in that it exists, right? But it's many varied in its expression, right? So you have a mother complex. We all have an idea of what a mother should be, but there are many types of mothers, right? But that is a mother archetype that exists out in the world, and it could take the form of a bear because that's a mother bear, or it could take form of the mother earth. And so getting in touch, and by the way, the reason that I love this, like you and I look at it differently. I've always looked at astrology as the best way to teach people metaphorical thinking, which is my passion, because what I find happens when people understand metaphor, they can connect things. When people can connect things, they feel better. I don't know what it is. It's in the process of connecting it. There is a fantastic, the best thinker out there, I've mentioned it before, Emma Gilchrist, argues that that's a right brain quality of making connections and allowing things, and that it's actually healthy. It's good for your mental health. And so when you teach people metaphors like that, they play with their own. They say, okay, where's my mother archetype showing up? And some people, the mother archetype is how much food they can ingest, right? Because mother has been replaced, as Marion Woodman famously said, with a muffin. Because the mother wasn't there. You know, she had an eating disorder. She understood, right? Is
that an example of a metaphor then?
It is a metaphor, by the way, which is really quite tragic in that she herself understood that, having an eating disorder, that often we replace food with the nurturing that we did not get from our parenting. So it's actually really to understand that when you grab the muffin, you can stop yourself and say, I'm grabbing my need to be nurtured. Can I find another way to do this? Maybe I need to listen to some music, or, it's understanding what's driving you. I mean, this is where psychological astrology is really powerful if you understand. So you would look in your chart and you go, oh, wow, I have a Pluto moon issue. So I have an issue around food and maybe mother. I know.
No, but okay. No, seriously though. You know how that's an example.
I wasn't going to say anything, Andre. You did.
No, I know, but a good example of working the archetype.
Yeah.
To try to discover what does it mean. So I mean, you can even think things like, which I don't know, this could be true. Maybe at some point I wasn't fed, or something like that, or whatever. But I try to look at it and think, okay, so the Pluto's wired. Moon is the mother, but it's actually literally food itself. The moon is the idea of the original is the breast milk, and food in general, like any intake, it's a crescent. So it's receiving. The fact that you live, you need to take in universal matter as food, you liquefy it, and then it becomes energy. Well, that's a big topic, even though it's like really simplistic. You try to get better at that and say, okay, what's the food that I need? What works well? What doesn't work well? And unless you're being neurotic, and in which case you'll know because your energy won't be very good. So the barometer is always, okay, is this archetype working? How's your energy? How are you feeling? Are you sleeping well? Do you have good health? If all of that is good, then chances are the archetype is probably working well. It may not be 100%, but better than if you say, oh, I have all these problems. I've got allergies. I've got, diseases. I have 7 different doctors. I can never solve it. That's probably, something telling you, okay, the archetype has gone off the rails, right? So
exactly. And I think what we both agree on this is awareness is the key, to be aware that something. And so when you go into Jungian analysis, much like when you go to see you as an astrologer, part of what I think happens in both those places is that they're helping you identify these complexes.
Correct.
Or these and complex for me in a chart is a square or an opposition or a conjunction, which brings in specifically the archetypal energies, because like I said, they're not energies that are under your control, right?
Correct.
So hopefully with the help of a good counselor, you're able to say, okay, it's not the mother you're missing. And you're right, the moon and food are intimately connected, of course, because nourishment keeps us alive or we die. And so this is where, by the way, it is really helpful to have people like you and like people who are consulting astrologers who have a wide background.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
I no offense to people starting out in astrology, but I remember what they used to say about journalists going, you're going to be a good journalist, going to journalism school may actually not be your best bet. Get a history degree, get a political science degree, understand
True.
how things
True.
work.
True.
And so the best astrologers to me combined, like you understand diet, you understand exercise, you understand motivational ideas, you understand philosophy, you love astronomy. If you have a person who is only relating to, like, Venus is this, it's like, no. Venus can be 70,000 things. Yes. And one of the things that really works well is, and for me, like a lot of my knowledge, because I'm as you know, my obsession is reading, is understanding that the old stories, the old myths, the old fairy tales actually are giving you clues as to these complexes.
Oh, yeah.
Because humans, we share a limited amount. So Jung comes into the picture in the early 20th century, of course, and he's influenced by Freud, but he's by no means, Freud's heir, as has sometimes been said. Jung walked his own way, and he had some very weird things happen to him in his life. He was definitely connected to a part of his psyche. By the way, I think we've looked at his chart in the past. He had that connection, that Sun Neptune square, very tight. He seems to have brought Neptune, another archetypal energy that can put you in the water and of the unconscious, and you can be swallowed. I mean, one of the things, I don't know how you feel about this, but there is no archetypal planet, no post-Saturnian planet that to me does not cause havoc in some way or another. There isn't, it's not a Jupiter type of energy. I mean, Jupiter can cause havoc if you overeat and you overdrink, but Neptune can cause real havoc, and you can get lost, like literally lost in a conspiracy theory, in an addiction, in a religious cult. I mean, there's so many ways you can get lost, but you can also produce great art, right? I mean, there's the archetypes have many faces. But again, if you talk to a person and you say, look, I see that Neptune is really, really wired into your chart, you probably shouldn't be taking drugs. I mean, this is something fundamentally that is going to damage you. Can you meditate, right? And we go back to knowing the archetypal energy allows you to have another outlet so that you don't get caught. And so, without going to Jung specifically, Jung, as you know, hid that he was, he had in his letters, and it's been revealed now, but because he was trying to establish himself as a psychiatrist, as a serious scientist, as an empiricist, beginning of the early 20th century, there was a real rejection of anything like this. It was considered completely insane. So he kept it under wraps. And it was actually, I will bring in the people who brought me to Jung, was actually, the person was Liz Green. And Liz Green is, for people who have not read her, for me, we all have favorite people that speak to us. I know we differ on these people. For me, Liz Green was seminal. I read her, and especially, I mentioned this book, Relating. I had an issue around my way of relating, and it was a book, Relating, that allowed me to understand what the problem was, which led me Jung, So I'll always be grateful for her, because, and I've recommended that book to many people, because even if you're not that well versed in astrology, if you have issues around relationships, she really, really takes you to where you need to go to understand the patterns that may be at work. So I always tell people, go back. She's now in her 70s. She won't be interviewed by anybody. Last time I saw her, she was, I took she did a seminar, and I kind of keyed in, and she was really funny because she kept smoking and going back and then talking. And she's just such a great eccentric character. But she was the one that was allowed, I think I mentioned this before, into the archives by the Jung family, because she is a Jungian analyst. She is a very well-known astrologer. She then got a PhD in another area. I mean, she's a supreme intellect. By the way, interesting chart, right? Scorpio rising, so very private, won't be interviewed. But she has the moon conjunct Mercury right up near the midheaven in Virgo. And she is great at Virgo-like things. She's a fantastic writer, and she's a fantastic communicator. But she's also very precise. If you read the transcripts of her books, you really get the sense of that strong Mercury, some elevated Mercury. Anyway, so it was her introduction to me. She introduced Jung. And then there were a bunch of other astrologers. Do you remember them? They all died. A couple of them died really tragically young. Howard Sasspertas, who was fantastic, and Richard Iddeman. I think both of them died of AIDS, but they died they were 40 maybe. They were very, very early. But their work is fantastic. If you can go back and find their books, I think, again, because they took the Jungian worldview that your chart is trying to tell you what the psychological issues you bring to the foreground are. And if you understand them, you can choose a different path. The point is understanding and identifying and believing that this is the case. If you said to me, my moon Pluto means I keep bumping into all these crazy obsessive women, I would say, no, that's you. Well, it could be. You would meet, is that not true that people...
Well, no, that's not untrue. Yeah, no, but that's the thing. No, listen, it's totally true. The whole idea is that where you do see these archetypal forces, and you realize what you said earlier is true, that it's like drinking really strong Kool-Aid, and you become convinced of something for a while it's around, that later you think, that was really strong Kool-Aid. But another part of it is that, yes, the people that are in your life, for a man, the Pluto moon or Pluto Venus will tend to show up in the women in his life. Just like for a woman, she has Pluto Sun, Pluto Mars, that kind of thing gets projected, because it's very difficult to be so androgynous that you've got the male, female so perfectly balanced. And maybe by the time you balance it, it doesn't matter, because you've already met all those women, or already met all those men, right? So yeah, that's 100% true. And that's where you're running into these archetypes in real life. It's right there.
Yeah.
You know, the Plutonian excesses as shown by the person you're with. Yes, 100%. Yeah.
So speaking of projection, that's a very important thing. So Marie-Louise von Franz, who was my favorite Jungian, always said you cannot really know yourself unless you project. That's how we know ourselves. We're not going to find the world all in ourselves. It's very hard unless we're meditating on a mountain. So what her point was, the first way you recognize the Pluto moon is by projection, because we're not born with infinite understanding.
So what's an example of that? How do you
Well, you meet, let's say, okay, I have a
Oh,
Pluto
you mean,
Venus.
okay.
Oh, yeah, right. You meet it in the other person, right? You say, oh, that's an obsessed person, not realizing that you, it's you, it's all you. But
yeah,
you can't tell it. You can't tell a 20-year-old it's all them, because they get kind of annoyed with you. It's like, no, I keep meeting these really excessive women or whatever. Or
yeah. Well,
women.
by the way, the other amazing thing that happens with this, and you may have spotted this in your chart, I certainly have in mine, is that where the planets are in the chart, it's like in my case, Pluto moon is early mutable Sagittarius to Virgo, and it's like a moth to a flame. Women specifically with planets in that very area, they come in to trigger it, act it out, and in a sense force you to confront the very archetype.
Yes.
Even though normally you'd think, oh, stay away from that, because that's uncomfortable. But it's like you go there almost like your evolution is saying, if you want to discover who you are, this is the person's so that they can annoy you. And, you know,
yes.
Exactly.
Well, I have to laugh, because in my Sophia group, one of the things we always laugh at is that, you know, we're all getting older and we think, wow, we figured that out. We really have. And then, you know, a month later, this very same type of person comes in, a little bit different, just so that it confuses you. And you're back in the same stupid game. And you're going, can I be this much of an idiot? Even what it tells you is awareness doesn't necessarily, the way I've put it is that it's like a musical piece, right? Like a musical note that keeps playing, right? Mm-hmm. And it doesn't quite necessarily resolve. Like, it's one of those things that you will get better with it. You will get some space with it. You'll be able not to be so reactive, but somehow maybe there's something about you came to be an expert in this, right? And this is what you used to tell me when we were very young, which is, look, this is hard, but in the end, because you're forced to face it over and over again with any kind of awareness. I'm not talking about massive awareness where you're doing, you know, intensive meditation and visualizing, whatever. With any kind of awareness, because you keep being brought to that place where where discomfort exists. If you can find space, you're already ahead of the game, because most of the problems are created by not finding space, by being very compulsive in your action. So with any Pluto, and we always go back to Pluto because Pluto is so incredibly compulsive, what your challenge is, and I think people keep coming back into your life to remind you that it's there. And so what it's telling you is, can you at this moment not be so reactive? Can you find 5 minutes before? And if you've done that, I mean, you're way ahead of the game, because we've all met the people, we've had them in our families. We've seen them out there where it's never their fault, because it's always somebody coming into their lives, not understanding. And this is such a powerful thing when you explain to people, if you take responsibility for that square in your chart, that complex, right? You are suddenly, you stop giving your power away, because it's never going to be about the other person. The people will show up regardless, right? They're going to show up. But your ability to greet that without dissembling, without getting into the, you know, blame game, without engaging in the wrong way, that's gold, right? But to teach people that, and we go back to the archetypal planets must have shown, okay, this is my thesis for my new novel. There has to be a reason. And, you know, of course, I'm creating a world. I'm a world builder. There's got to be a reason that we were ready on an evolutionary level to see those planets. They were always there, but the humans couldn't see it. Why? That's what kind of intrigues me. And maybe it's because we are evolving or devolving, because we never evolve in a straight line, towards an understanding, right, of something about the human condition that we were not ready to receive until, and, you know, let's think about it this way. When the planet gets first sighted, you get the really lousy expression of it, because Uranus while it was involved with, yes, freedom, revolution, it was involved with the guillotine. It was involved with a lot of dislocation. It led to a lot of issues as well. And then as it goes in, it still creates a lot of havoc. Neptune, when it gets discovered, we're in the romantic period, but we're also in the creation of drugs, right? Of the idea. So that had both its good and its bad, and in its expression, although mostly good. Thank God we have them. There's just the way that it first appears is telling you a lot about what the nature of that planet is. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, Pluto aligns very much with the rise of Nazi Germany, the Nazi movement in the 30s, and the atomic bomb. And Uranus in 2005, and we're going to have to go back to Uranus because I think that is a new enough discovery that we still haven't quite understood its implications. Correct. But we know that it's really about a revolt of something that it's in the underworld, it's been there trapped, and it's sick and tired of not being invited to the table. So we're going to see manifestations of this. But then if you put them in your personal planets, and now we're aware that we have them, right? Then you have to confront them. You can't just say they're not there. I mean, you have to say, if they're there, then I'm carrying them. And what's the reason for them, right? And I think Jung understood that. He said, look, when people come into my consulting room, and he himself said that about himself. He is in his 80s now. He worked all of his life on this, and he was still reactive. He understood that. And whenever he got reactive around anything, he said, oh, thank you to the person that made him feel that way, because he realized it was showing to him that he still had not mastered completely. There was one particular case, where I think he was short with a housekeeper or something, and then he understood, oh my God, I still have not resolved this. Well, and so to me, if someone of his stature is not able to resolve it, I'm not going to be an expert of any kind. But it does take you to what the kind of work we need to do, at the end of the day.
If you knew that Armenian mystic Gurdjieff, he was, I think, Sun and Moon in Capricorn, really Capricornian. And what he would teach his students was to remain calm. And so, for instance, the thing of, he'd say, you if you're going to express anger, you can't for 2 minutes, or things like that, to create distance. And he would deliberately, one of the stories is that there was one of the disciples was extremely annoying and was making everyone very uncomfortable. And then when the person left, they were all really happy, and he paid them to come back. And he said, this man is like yeast for bread, because you need him. And then when that person would get upset, he would just look at them and say, don't be disturbed. So it's sort of the logic that whatever's coming up, in a sense, is neurosis, and there will be things that, you're forced to, it can even be bad weather, it's really cold, and you start to complain, but life is doing this to you all the time. So you have to figure out a way to remain calm, and then that archetype settles so that you're less likely, to be led into unsavory or, mistaken approaches. So
I have to laugh about Gurdjieff, because I remember you told me about Gurdjieff when we were in our 20s. And, you pointed out that, like me, he also had Moon and Sun in Capricorn. And I remember you telling me about the dirt. You remember this? You said, you see, you're a very early explorer of philosophy. You said, Gurdjieff would take and he'd make them dig a hole. And then after that, they'd all be happy they dug the hole. And he said, okay, now put the earth back. And you were so serious about this. And I remember in my early 20s, and I'm like, oh, I'm just going to do my hair. And thinking, what the hell is he talking about?
But you know what it was about, though? Gurdjieff's thing was, this is really interesting. He attracted, because he had this really magnetic presence, and so he attracted people to, and often they were very well-to-do aristocratic people that had a lot of money, which he was perfectly happy to take. He needed the money, but they were very in their mind. They were very intellectual, and they thought he was teaching them intellectual energy, and he wasn't. He was teaching them practical, here and now, do things that really ground you. So that's why he'd say, go dig a hole. And then they thought there was a purpose. There was no purpose. The purpose was just dig the hole. Now the next purpose is to put it back. I mean, it's a little extreme, right?
No, but I mean, it's a great way. It's a great way to gain presence, which I think you did explain.
Yeah, no. And by the way, he taught, it's interesting that he was really into music, and he taught really complicated dance moves and things like that. And I remember doing some of those practices, and what they do is they so ultra focus you, your sort of monkey mind disappears. Suddenly you're in the room and you're, oh, wow, I feel really good. And all you really have done is created a certain amount of effort and brought yourself into the moment. So he was doing it through his own back door that, many other systems use, breath or whatever. Same idea. He liked the idea of, for example, setting up all these people doing complicated dance moves, keep them really busy, ultra focused, and to reach that effect. right? So
It's really interesting because now neuroscience will talk about the difference between a child's mind and what happens to us, and that neuroscience will say what the problem with the adult is that they've started doing everything on automatic pilot.
correct.
Right. So a child is greeting the world as a new thing. And so they're very engaged with the
Okay.
world, and the mind cannot take over. And then we've all become like drivers in a car where we're not
Okay.
thinking about the
And you know
driving,
what?
right?
You know what he used to say? He used to say, you're like a machine, and people are always kicking each other's machines because what they're doing is they're acting unconsciously, annoying one another. No one steps back to be conscious enough to do something a little different or be a little more
Right.
present. So
Right.
yeah, that's
so you know what's interesting about all these spiritual teachers or psychological, because I don't think Carl Jung would have disagreed with that at all.
Mhm.
He would say that's exactly it. What you have to become conscious of are he would call it a complex. We call it a square, an opposition, or an aspect, a difficult aspect. But
Right.
fundamentally, they're speaking about the same thing. You get
Right.
to choose your reaction. Things will happen, but how you're going to react to
Correct.
it is going to be either conscious or unconscious, or blaming or accepting that, oh, something's come through the door. This is
Right.
not pleasant. Like you say, you know, it gets cold sometimes. Can you deal with it? And so actually practicing with the little allows you to deal with the big, right? So it's not a bad thing to do at all. But I think the first step, and that, you know, you do an astrology program here, is to tell people getting to know those aspects in your natal chart are actually really important. I'm going to bring the second part of it. One thing I think is really, and James Hillman, who is now a student, now we're talking about a student of Jung, he developed the idea that we're not one self, we are many selves, and that the problem is we were trying to be one self, and that's insane. If you think about astrology, astrology reminds us we are many selves. We have a Venus, we have a Mars, we have a Mercury. In some of our cases, one of those planets is going to be more adversely aspected, and it may be running the show. And so maybe what you do in parts therapy is to understand there's other parts.
Correct.
So don't take
Correct.
over the show, right? Like the Mercury, Pluto, you don't have to be an obsessive thinker. Maybe we can bring other parts of your chart, like the Jupiter or whatever, to help you out.
Right.
So I always say, if you're going to use this in a way that will help you, which I think is the way it should be used. Otherwise, you know, when you get into this nonsense of prediction, what happens there is that there are too many variables. And while you can get the weather, you know, people often are, I don't know how you see it, but I see that often people are keying into their anxiety. They want certainty, or certainty does not exist. But what you can teach them is, hey, listen, you do have an aspect in your chart that predisposes you to think obsessively about certain things. Right. Let's use your Saturn to watch over that obsessive thinking, right? And so this is where this is a really powerful tool. And I think when it gets into magic tricks, that's where it gets depotentiated. And so that's why I go back to that. The best astrologers have many, many different disciplines that they've trained in, so that they're actually counseling. And I think that is being missed by a lot of the young astrologers who are very enamored of the techniques, but they're missing the part that I think is really necessary, which is to bring together a wealth of knowledge that comes from different disciplines, right? And that you can bring to bear, because people don't come to see astrologers unless generally they're in pain, right? Something isn't working, right? And so they want answers. And if you're a person that is not centered and you're kind of reading it as a card trick, which is what I think happens sometimes, you're missing the larger potential in something that is saying, well, look, these are archetypal energies. This is how you're hardwired. And then it can get even more interesting. And I'm sure you've done this, looking at family patterns and how families seem to, and this is very important because it's hardwired in our mythological systems. We all know, look at the father killing. The killing of the father is right and encoded in our myths. Uranus kills his son Saturn, or tries to do away with his son Saturn. Or no, sorry, it's the opposite. Saturn kills Uranus because it's his father and castrates him. And then Jupiter kills Saturn because Saturn's trying to do away with Jupiter. There is a family-son dynamic in that mythological framework that is that's telling you a bigger story. You can say, oh yeah, okay, well, you know, you can go very Freudian and say, well, the son is envious of the father, or you can say, well, or the father is envious of the son and the power of being young or whatever, or you can look at it in a bigger way. That is how the older generation generally looks at the newer generation. They're threatened by the fact that the newer generation is bringing in ideas that threaten the older generation's stability or the idea. So it can expand in so many different ways. But if you look at it in a family chart and you keep saying, hey, this is something that keeps showing up and all, then this is, I think, first of all, I think it blows my mind. I don't know about you, but when I see that and I think, wow, we know from Greek drama that we inherit a lot of our reactions. How can we not, right? I mean, we've learned how to react to things because we watched it in our house. And then you see that our parents and our grandparents are carrying it. And so at some point, just like in the Oresteia, the very famous trilogy by Aeschylus, someone in that family has to say, I refuse to react that way. I am not going to do that
That's
anymore.
right. Right.
And that is the moment the story changes, right?
That's true. Yeah, that's 100% true. Yeah, because it's whether you call it astrology patterns, genetics, because it's both what you saw, that's true, and what you experienced, but it's also you because you're carrying the genetics. So it's kind of facile to say, well, I'm this way because my father and my mother and my grandfather were this way. Yeah, partly, but also you are they. Like Pir Vilayat, the Sufi master, at one point said, "You are your father who lives in you." Don't be confused about that.
Yeah, you're the whole thing. I know. You know what? That's an important thing to know. I told people that I think you can heal your parents without even them being alive. And the idea that you're healing the pattern that they brought and could not resolve, right? So they had let's go back to Pluto moon, and you have a Pluto moon, and they did not manage it very well. And they ended up suffering and making other people suffer, which is the thing we want to avoid. If you as the child are able to find a way through that, then you have inherently healed the whole family because you found a way to break through the planet. And I have a theory about this, and this is probably kooky, but I'll put it out there anyway. You may then have a child that doesn't have that pattern anymore because that pattern has been resolved. So then there's no need for a second generation, third generation, whatever, to carry it anymore. Because I think the reason we carry them is we are dealing with unresolved issues that have been passed on unconsciously down the line. Nobody ever took a look at them. And
so is that like where, so for example, let's say you're in a certain year of your life and you've become aware that you have a pattern, whatever pattern it is, could be Pluto moon, could be Pluto, whatever, or even one of the Uranus, Neptune, some pattern, right? And you discover your reactions, you pay more attention, you do whatever you're doing, and you reach either by epiphany or by attrition, you reach, this new place, and you realize, this is working a lot better. So you're kind of saying in a way that your genetics or something in your mysterious whatever gets changed. And then if you have a child at that point, that they don't, that's how it would be, which is almost magical, but yet it's part of the the paradigm you're expressing, right? Right. Okay.
This is the way I would look at it. That is there a need then for that? If you're looking at a family system, right? Is there a need for anybody else to carry it? If the person, whatever, in the middle has decided, I'm going to consciously work on this so it does not manifest in the destructive way it manifested in parents, grandparents. Okay, you know how this works? I'll tell you how it works in a very simple example. The abuser sometimes abuses, many times abuses others. If somebody stops that pattern, that abuse pattern gets stopped. The person who is born in that next generation isn't having to play that out anymore. They didn't witness it. They didn't feel that this was part of how we deal with the world, right? And so I feel that gets translated. Now, it may be that you have other things because we're always trying to resolve things, but maybe that particular pattern is not necessary as a necessary thing. And this is, by the way, what makes great drama so great, what makes Shakespeare so amazing. They understood that there were certain things that unconsciously were poisoning the people who came after them, and that it had to take a Hamlet to stand up. It had to take an Orestes. It had to take somebody who said, I need consciousness to come into the building so that this doesn't keep happening. And once you do that, then there's no need to continue with that. So when you say that you heal the family, you can heal backwards, not only forwards. You're not only healing. It's almost like I create stories. I mean, I'm a storyteller. I'm a novelist. So this is all a novel to me, right? Even the world, even the life I'm living, it's a novel. I mean, this is why it's so exciting. No, but think about it. Think about this. Let's say we're creating a novel about our particular family, right? And let's say our family had...
This is a scary thought.
I think you'd say that most families would say that. It's like,
I know, it's true. It's true. No, that's actually, by the way, that's just as an aside. Sometimes when you think of the troubles in your family, you think, oh my God. But then you realize that, no, I mean, this is pretty universal. There are so many.
It's of course universal.
Like I'll often think the opposite. I'll think, no, actually, my family was pretty sane with some of the things that I run into.
For some of the things that are, I totally agree.
Yeah.
But even, it's interesting. Even if your family was fairly sane, there's always something that was unresolved for the child. Some task. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So one thing I always tell my group is make a fairy tale about your family. Like put it into a fairy tale because you can get some distance, right? Once upon a time. I know it can get very interesting. Trust me. We did it for a weekend.
Once upon a time, my grandmother, whose name meant happiness.
What does seem to exemplify the exact opposite? I know. Oh, it's so funny. I know, because we always have those bigger, larger than life characters in our
Well,
lives.
and it's interesting that you think, like, normally you think if you get a name, then that should imprint your, logically,
Yeah, it's your
right?
personality.
But it's not always going to be true necessarily, right? Maybe it's
Well,
like,
okay, we just have to step in here, okay, and say that my name is Beatriz, and then it means one who brings happiness. And I think I'm compensated for Felicita, who brought no happiness to anybody. So you can embody, or you can try to embody the name. But I mean, this is all like, again, it's like a novel. We're all playing with words, and it doesn't necessarily mean, although it is funny with names that, people will end up doing the professions that their names are kind of signifying. Sometimes it's always a thing that makes me laugh. But let's say we are creating, in all seriousness, a novel or a fairy tale about our particular family. And we say, look, we've identified that the one thing that keeps operating as an unresolved note, something that is causing, and everybody has that. Everybody keeps a certain secret. Nobody wants to talk about the drunk father. Nobody wants to talk about the person in the family who's a cheat or a liar. Nobody wants to talk about the abuse because it's embarrassing. So we identify what that is, right? The reason I make people do fairy tales is that you can step back. You're not saying me. If you're too associated, you get, it's too difficult because it's painful, right? But what I thought was interesting, and this is why I love teaching people metaphorical thinking, is that when you create these kinds of things, you reveal things you didn't even know were operating in the background. So I said, have fun, and suddenly something is coming to light that was not in awareness, but by playing with it. And this is why creativity is so powerful, and why people should be engaging in play, the fifth house, creativity.
Fifth house.
Because it's like, it's the play. Why is it so powerful? Why does Venus joy there? Because a lot of answers come from there, and a lot of release, and a lot of way to relate. But anyway, it gives you some distance, and you can say, what is really operating? Because I think, and this is where a chart where you're working with a counselor who knows what they're doing. And I stress that I think a lot of people that don't really have that kind of knowledge, so it's hard for them to tell you. But I think once you identify those patterns, you have a way to make your life meaningful. I'm going to go that far, but if you tell someone you are here to resolve that pattern, you're here, that is why you're here. Forget the rest of it. This is what's it. And this is what you have to do. And here are some things you could use. You can use discipline through Saturn. You can use visualization or meditation through Jupiter. You put it all together, right? Then that person has the chance. And I'm telling you, you will heal your ancestors and your descendants, because at that moment, there's no need anymore. Right. How powerful is that? I mean, most of the problems that are created in the world are created by massive acts of unconsciousness, people who are not aware that they are damaging others to such a great degree. And that's the very definition of evil in some ways. But of course, it's a harsh word, because you think, well, and this is also something that's in the chart, your shadow. Every planet has a shadow side, right? Mm-hmm. And if it's, again, touching an archetypal planet, then the shadow is going to be, I think, enormous. I mean, you keep seeing it, right? Partially you're there to say, and you think to people, you've met people who have had a particularly difficult time. And a lot of people who've had a particularly difficult time then go on to actually be very helpful to the world because they've had that particularly difficult time. So, look at Eckhart Tolle's chart. That's a very tough chart. But the guy went through a lot of pain, was almost suicidal, and then he came out the other way, and he was able to write some books that help, that appeal to some people, maybe not to all. And you can look at many examples of people who've gone through that. But they're many more examples of people who do not. They just crumble, right? And that's it. So again, we go back to the chart as a map that can help you identify these things, and also as as a map. But again, I do think you need help. I think it's not as easy as people think. A lot of people pick up these books, they do the cookbook thing. This means that. I mean, no. When you start blending these archetypal energies together, it is so difficult, because there isn't one answer, and most people are looking for the one answer, and you can forget that.
Archetypal soup.
It's an archetypal soup. It really is. But you can still discern. You can still get things up. But you know what I mean? Like, there's such a simplistic attitude. Wow, I'll just do this, or I'll wait for the right transit. No, you don't wait for anything. You're working always to identify, to take ownership over it. And don't blame anybody. The moon Pluto isn't your mother. It's actually you, and you've got an issue with food. Go deal with it. It liberates your mother, who was unconscious. Like, let's say that's the issue. It liberates you, because you're now not dependent on your mother saying, oh, I love you, I'm going to now give you affection, or whatever it is your issue is. You're now saying, I'm going to mother myself, and I'm going to mother myself by making better food choices, or by being more aware that if I eat certain foods, I feel sick, right? So it is so powerful, this stuff. But again, in the hands of what I call, I would say, inexperienced people, or people who are using it as a game, or people that are, I think it becomes less powerful. And that's sad. And I think it goes back to the fact that I think the psychological astrologers are not in fashion anymore. I think they should be read. I think you should understand your psychology.
Because I mean, if you think about it, what ends up happening, the danger of doing an astrology that doesn't filter through the psychological realm is that then you can make statements like you see, I don't know, you see something in the person's whatever house, and you say something like, well, you have this problem. Well, but what's the solution to the problem? The problem holds the solution. If there is even if it's a planet and it's got squares and oppositions, right? Those become the richest sources of energy if you look into them. If not, then you can make a blanket statement and say, for example, you see Saturn in the second house, square Uranus, opposed Pluto, and you can say you're going to be bankrupt. You're going to lose money. You'll never have any money in your life. And then you discover that there's someone out there who is extremely rich with the same aspect. And you ask yourself, well, how can this work? Like Buffett, as an example, has Saturn, Mars cutting across his money houses. That's not really the most ideal thing. But what he did is he just worked at it. He became interested,
like an expert.
He got into it, and he becomes an expert.
Saturn,
right? And he's the Mr. Blue Chip, cautious investment.
Yes.
But he's extremely rich. So you can't ever pin it to a certain thing. And the temptation is to, because you heard it somewhere, or you use the straight up most obvious book meaning, and that can actually be very damaging, because then the person walks away with limited perspectives, right?
Limited perspectives, and it really plays into, I think, what is their biggest downfall, which is we're always looking for one answer, and there isn't one answer. And I think we have to develop a much more sophisticated way of approaching things. There are many ways to look at it, and in fact, it's in your expansion of vision that you are allowed a broader vision that allows you to make better choices. But you can't have that broadness of vision if you're looking at a cookbook and saying, 2 parts Venus and 1 part Saturn. That just doesn't work. It is living with these archetypes, is living with the transits and understanding how they work in you. And by the way, here's the other thing. They're going to work differently in every person, right? Saturn Mars can manifest in 17,000 different ways. You got to look at the whole thing. You got to look at the development the person's at, how much work. Now, I just have to laugh on the Warren Buffett thing, because the last thing I saw with him was him railing against cryptocurrencies, right? And I think, Saturn Mars person with it's no Uranus there, right?
Yeah,
no pro energy. It's so
by
funny.
the way, now it's an aside. Now tell me what you think about this, because if you think of Jung and his journey, he was a Leo,
right?
And ultimately, as I understand it, it's the journey to the sun, the journey to the being self. When a person says, "I'm confident, I'm myself, I am who I want to be," it's actually any sign, but it's the Leo archetype most directly, which, by the way, tunes into what you said earlier. It's the play sign, interestingly. So you're taking things lightly and so on. But more to the point is that when this also went to his thing, wasn't Jung the one that had the quadrants with feeling, thinking, intuiting? The idea would be that the pure being, when you reach the journey's end, is you're living in full confidence and always in touch with your intuition, which tends to be beyond your thoughts, right? So that all that analysis that you do, all that, digging and looking, in the end, you drop it in favor of just pure being, which may sound a little bit unreachable, and yet, to my mind, is what he himself was probably trying to point to. That if you
in the end,
it's because
I'm just going to comment. Sorry, go ahead.
No, continue. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that the last people he was actually reading before he died were Zen Buddhists, right? I mean, Jung really dipped his toes in so many different places. I will say this: I think when you talk about the 4 functions, right, which type so well to the elements in astrology, right? Mm-hmm. He would say that we're like a 3-legged table, and that there was one leg that's very shaky. Okay, so we're all strong. Yes,
of the 3 or the 4? Of the 3,
right?
Of the 4,
of the
okay.
4, right.
So 3 are strong and 1 is weak. Okay.
And 1 is weak. That tends to happen because usually 2 you're very strong and 2 are very, but 1 specifically, and he called that the inferior function. Now, let's say you look at a chart, right? And you do the typological analysis, and you say, well, I'm very heavy in air and very, very low in fire. Well, you may need to work on your intuition a bit. You may need to work on your creativity a bit, because that air is kind of overwhelming. You're thinking things too much. You may be a brilliant thinker, but you're lacking that connection to fire, right? And so you want to look at that, because here's the key. He thought the key to the personality was the inferior function. Where you're weakest is where you're going to end up being strongest. You know why? That's where the solution comes from. And here's how he saw it. And we're going to go back to the car analogy again. Okay. When you're driving in a car, you're using your very powerful functions. You worked in all your life. You're so used to it. You go on automatic pilot. The problem with the inferior function is it makes you have to go into a conscious state because it is so bloody difficult. And so he said, and it's in our fairy tales and it's in our myths, it is actually knowing what your inferior function is that is actually the key to you solving all your problems, whether it's a creative problem, a human problem. And the thing about that is that if you are very short, let's say in one of the elements, and I'm just going to use the elements because, of course, they match very nicely to the elements of all, although not exactly, but they do to a great degree, you're not going to feel comfortable going to that part that's weak. I'll give you the analogy that's best. When Andrew, my husband, was coaching soccer, he would always have the problem with the young kids because once they got really good at scoring, they didn't want to use the other foot. And Andrew, to this day, we're watching Spain today. Busquets missed because he used his weak foot. He skied it, and he said, "Look, he doesn't." I just thought, here it comes.
He doesn't have a weak foot. He doesn't.
I know. He does not like weak feet. He said you have to be 2-footed. He did that to Will. Will and Andre? Both of them were very good soccer players. And I always thought it was what part of it was Andrew going no, and of course the kid didn't want to do it. At 8 years old, you want to score, but he would say you need to build it. And so your inferior function is that like that weak right leg in the case of Will or the left leg in the case of Andre. They don't want to build it because they don't want to feel inferior. And yet that's what will make them the most powerful. And so to think about it, if you think about the elements and where you're weakest, right? Or the area that doesn't function as well, that is actually what you really should be looking to. It's kind of your way out. That was his theory anyway.
So wasn't it what there were four: thinking, feeling, intuiting? What was the fourth?
Sensation, which is earth, which is funny because you as an earth person should know this. But
okay, no, I know. That's I missed one. I missed the one for earth. Okay, so sensation is earth. Intuition is fire, feeling is water, and thinking is air, right?
Yeah. But I want to be clear because feeling is a very, very kind of sketchy thing. Feeling is not what people think. It's not emotion the way that we understand it. Feeling is the ability, and you'll recognize what I'm about to tell you, of sitting with something and understanding what it means to you, the value, its worth, right? So it's not like I get emotional. Emotional, you can get with any of these things because emotion means you lost control of your center.
Right.
Feeling is not what he says. Feeling is something like, you know how there are people, they close their eyes and they go, yeah, I can't do that. And you think, okay, how can they be so certain? Because they're so in contact with their inner self that they understand themselves that way. So it's a valuing function. It is not emotion. I just wanted to, because that's the one that trips people up.
So then, okay, but how would that work? Because I'm thinking, if I think of my own chart, the weakest element is air.
Right. And so one of the things you see with people who are weak in an element is they overcompensate in that element. They are driven to it so much that becomes their strongest element.
So, but how is that going to solve my problems? Like, if I'm gonna solve my the quadrant of like, this is going to be the doorway.
Right.
Is it that then it would be that through the world of ideas,
yes,
I discover
what have you done?
Yes, well, I guess so. Yeah, in a certain way.
I mean, you do it through your body because you're very connected to your body. You work really hard on it because that's where you're master, right? But the fact is, the world of ideas has brought you into that. And if you think about it, what are you attracted to? You often send me stuff that is, it's very, you really are attracted to that. Well, just like I am, because I am also pretty weak in air. And so, but I keep going back to it. I'm surrounded by 3,000 books. What? Because there's a tendency. It's almost like you. I know I can't stop. And all I do is read. It's pathetic.
All the books. Yeah, I know. It's like you keep reading. Remember that movie, great movie with Bill Murray, where he's become a Zen practitioner and he has all these books, and then he goes up to the mountains and carries all these books, and then the weather is changing and he realizes he can't get back, and you see him he's pondering what to do, and then eventually he realizes that the only way he can survive is by lighting the books on fire, and you see him lighting the books, and then a smile comes on it, on his face. He's realized the real meaning. That he doesn't have to keep all those amazing books. Yeah, it's true.
Well, as I get older, I think I got to start getting rid of them. This is crazy, but that's only because I have the electronic versions. But the point is that in both our cases, we are going to our inferior function because we intuitively understand that is something that makes us whole. Okay, that's it.
Right.
But you have to be careful because you can go so much to the other side that you lose contact with it. So you're always balancing, right? But I would argue that a lot of people either overcompensate or can never grasp it at all. So with a person who's very weak in sensation, for example, I have a couple in my group. They're the kind of people that can't do their taxes. They find functional things every day really hard. Like cooking, forget it. I can't cook. Like sensation people just they're very good with the facts of life. They're just very good with, oh, do you have to do something? You have to fix something? They just do it, right? So understanding where, I mean, it's a great entry point. It's such a basic thing. People can do their elemental analysis online and at least understand, I'm weak in this area. You go read a book on typology, not the Myers-Briggs. That's just nonsense. Don't do that. That's just confusing. But I think, because Jung would never approve that. So
Actually, though, in defense of Myers-Briggs, I'll just tell you this. A long time ago, I think I was, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 years into astrology. And I did a Myers-Briggs, and you know what it said? That I would be an astrologer.
Really?
Yeah. So, you know what it was, though? What it was, for whatever reason, it seemed to tie it to something in my personality about entertainment, which I don't see it as entertainment at all.
But that's hilarious. Of course, you're doing entertainment. You've been doing videos for 2 years, making people laugh about.
Well, yeah, no, but I mean,
it is exactly you. I can't believe it. See, we can never see ourselves.
No, but that's not the point. The point isn't why it says it's me. The point is, why does the Myers-Briggs point to it that way? It's a little bit strange. I mean, I just think it is, despite now, but again, it doesn't matter what it tells you anyway, because if Myers-Briggs tells you that you're whatever it tells you, great. So let's say it tells you you're an engineer. How is that going to illuminate you?
Well, exactly. I really, this is what I'm pointing to, that I think it can limit people's ability to understand themselves. You can't categorize people. People are extremely, I mean, you are an entertainer, but you're a deep thinker. I mean, you've been doing meditation since I've known you. So you can't just say I'm an entertainer. And this is the problem. I think especially when you're young and you get categorized that way, you start putting yourself in a box. I don't think he understood what he said all the time, Jung, which is why I respected him, is every individual is its own universe. You cannot. And it's interesting. Every chart is very, very individual as well. And so you can't just say, well, you're going to be a singer or a dancer or whatever, right? It just doesn't work. So we probably talk way over what you probably wanted to. Maybe we'll come back, because one thing I haven't addressed, which Jung brought into the conversation, which I think is so powerful, is how our gods change and how we're being mapped by our gods. Our belief systems are being basically dictated to us by the way the planets are moving. So maybe if people are interested, we can come back and look at that. So
are you saying, just to touch on it quickly, like, for example, if a person is going along and you take one of like a planet like Pluto, or especially say Eris, because they're so far away, their orbits can be such that it'll be in the background for long periods, and you just are not in contact. And then it surfaces, and all of a sudden it becomes your thing. It's back to that strong Kool-Aid for a while. Pluto, actually, by your logic, which is totally correct, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and beyond can do that through different periods. And where it gets a little bit complicated, possibly enriching, but possibly destructive, is when more than one come on the scene, because they can conflict with each other. And so, but see, this is the thing. When I look back on my life, some of the periods that were most enriching, all of them were in on the battle, and I was having to balance out Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, all basically looking for attention. So it's tricky, because it's the archetypal soup that is a little bit too intense.
Right. So I wasn't going to, but that's actually another conversation as well. That's the first level, because that's the personal expression of it. Okay, so there's 3 levels we could talk about it. It probably requires 3 different conversations. One is what you just talked about, and I think it is so important, because if you're living through, and we went through this. I remember you counseling me as I was going through Pluto conjunct Venus square Mars. That was a pretty intense transit, during which I basically tore my feet into
didn't you run marathons? You're running marathons, right?
I was training for a marathon, but I was an idiot.
No, but
I practically broke my legs.
No, but you did. I mean, this was really classic. Didn't you? You did at least a half marathon. I remember.
I did a half marathon, because after running 45K in a training run, I destroyed my feet so badly I couldn't do more than half a. I mean, that went to your Pisces rising, by the way. Yeah.
I'm sorry, but.
What, I'm just deluded?
I often tell people, this is something about astrology. I often mention to people that to realize that these categories are not just places where astrologers put things to be cute. They are deadly accurate.
Oh, yeah.
Very, very accurate. The body parts, right? And Aries as the head, Pisces as the feet. This is not made up.
Pisces as the feet. Yeah, I know. I didn't hit my head. My feet broke. Yeah, But I remember you saying, "Oh, you're on a Pluto transit." I said, "No, I was like getting crabby with you," but I realized that I was obsessive. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I'd go on that treadmill for 2 hours, and I would just boom, 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 boom. Yeah, anyway, make sure you understand things. But so that was that would be the first conversation. So how they manifest in your life and what to do when they come in, because I think, look, telling people that they're coming into your life is useless if you can't give give them some antidotes to the
Yeah,
medicine.
of course,
This is a
yeah.
possible, a possible approach. Second level, though, which I think is really fascinating, is what happens when planetary cycles are initiated. Like, let's look at the Pluto. You can even go just the most recent one, which is big, not recent, but 1990, that Neptune Uranus conjunction
Oh,
in
the
Capricorn.
conjunction, yeah.
Those kids are getting powerful now. It's interesting to talk about that because then you see how it's manifesting, right? Or if you look
Right.
at the 1890s and the Pluto Neptune conjunction, that Hitler, J.R. Tolkien, all these people. So looking at those cycles. And then there's a third level. And this is maybe the most complicated one, but the most interesting. How our gods that are actually articulated in our mythologies in the world are being set by precession, by the idea that every 2,000 years we enter a different astrological age. And that if you look at the mythology, it is absolutely 100% clear. The problem is too many kooky people, I'm going to be very clear, have come in and created disciplines around that just sound insane. And you don't have to. You just have to know enough about mythology to make a case for it. And I will make a case for it if people are interested in making.
Oh, well, good. Yeah, I look forward.
So those are three possible ones because, whatever, we could laugh.
Yeah, for sure. We'll continue. So tell us about this. You're involved in a really interesting podcast.
So I started a podcast. So what I'm talking to you about, it has no astrology. It's Jung, though. And so what happened is, as a creative person, I partnered with a singer-songwriter, Jay Redelsperger from Oklahoma, who we started talking online about the creative process and how Jung saw it. Because remember that Jung was interested in the unconscious. It doesn't matter if it's a dream or it's a song or it's a novel. It's all coming from the same place. So our podcast really talks about that, but it addresses a lot of the issues or a lot of the ideas that came from Jung. And frankly, Jung is really hard to read sometimes because he's quite dry. So what we're doing is playing with the ideas and trying to make them real to people. And we're using, for people who are interested in music, Jay is a wonderful singer-songwriter. So we're using his music too, because why not bring that? I can't read my novel out on air yet. Yeah, one day maybe I will. I'll go, okay, now I'm going to read. I don't think so. But anyway, the point is that we're really talking about the creative process, but as a way to teach people about Jung. If they don't want to read the 22 collected volumes, which I think most people don't, it's just the way in. So it's called Gatherings. Maybe you can link it in your show in the below.
Do that. I'll place
and
it
people
on
can and I ask anybody who likes it if they can please subscribe on Apple Music and leave us a rating. That's actually how people find us, and it's really helpful for. And we're releasing every week, and I hope people like it. And I hope they email me and tell me what they would like us to talk about. It's been a lot of fun. It's great. One of the great things about social media is you meet these people that you would never meet, and maybe I'll never meet this person in real life, but we have a great dialogue because we're both interested in something that is, minority view. Like, not everybody wants to talk about Jung. Not everybody's a creative that wants to do that. So it's a fabulous arena for people of common interest to find each other, and I think it's wonderful. And this is the Aquarius.
I had this thought when you were saying that, because in a way it's like the all of this builds collaborations, right? The collaboration energy. And I thought to myself, imagine if to work on your Pluto you had to do create a podcast with Marjorie Taylor Greene, so you had to agree with your. I think after that your Pluto would get more integrated, or Lauren Boebert.
Give me liberty or give me death. I think I'll take death. Or give me. I know this is so funny. Okay, everybody's like, yes, I'll do whatever it takes. Then you say, okay, I'll do a podcast with the 3 M's or that woman with the 3 names, and it's like, no, okay, it's okay. I'll just continue. I'll continue to be unconscious. I can deal with it. It's so hard. But you know what? That actually, as you say about big teachers, those people who are so supremely unconscious and unconscious enough to actually be nasty and hurtful, they are your best teachers, because one thing you're always being aware of, this is not the path. Do not react to things the way they do, because they default to hate, and that is not what we're here for. If we're defaulting to hate, we missed it. So maybe dealing with those people is actually the best way. If we're able to keep our center and not go to the hate side and say, oh, I hate, we all do it because we get so exasperated when we see that level of unconsciousness and just insane behavior. But they are actually the people we need to be able to they're the people that we need to build that pause before we react and just look and kind of with curiosity and say, that's interesting.
Which is really difficult, because it's one thing. Like, it's one thing to say you learn to realize, okay, these individuals say these crazy things. I can learn to ignore them. After a while, you get used to it. But it's quite another if you said, okay, well, you're going to be traveling in a car with Lauren Boebert from coast to coast. You have a problem, because unless you say, well, I'm just going to let her talk and ignore her. But but even worse, if someone said, well, no, the two of you have to cooperate in bringing this about, because she's going to say something like, whatever. I'm not even going to go
Yeah,
that.
even fathom. Yeah.
But you know what? It's that idea that there's such a gulf, such a gap,
Yeah.
that it can be really, really tough. So,
Well, let's leave with what Ram Dass used to say: "You think you're so enlightened, go spend a weekend with your parents." I think it's the same thing. You enter certain places, and all your complexes get triggered. You're suddenly a little child, having the same argument you had, even though you may be 75 years old. And I think that is the human condition, and I think we all suffer from it. And all we can do is take it a step at a time and hope that we somehow get even 1 second. That's what I call it, the pause. Even to find a second is always good. So
it's
that's all
good.
you can
But,
do.
it's, by the way, as a final thing, really quick,
Yeah.
I called my channel, I called it Astrology Alert, but there's a dual thing. The reason I put alert in there is because that, in a sense, encapsulates all conscious work, in that in order to do conscious work, you have to find a way to be alert.
Yeah.
That you're alert to astrology is another layer, because that also gives you patterns. But prior to even saying I'm under Pluto, Saturn, there's the alertness of your immediacy, which is super important, because that's what will prevent you from, as Gurdjieff put it, turning into a machine and just unconsciously reacting in the same way you've always reacted. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, let's see with Gurdjieff, since he's carrying all the Capricorn, we also carry you and me.
That's
true.
Perfect. That's true. Okay. All right. Thank you again for today's session, and I look forward as soon as, including, by the way, that I'd love to at some point connect with you and your partner on the podcast as well.
Sure. Bring them on. Absolutely. It's so interesting. I mean, astrology isn't his thing, but he's very interested. He's a quick study, so it'd be interesting to see see how to bring it in. That'd be awesome. Thank you.
Excellent. All right.
Okay. Cool. See you next time.
All right.